I want to preface this video by saying not all depression is caused by environmental conditions. Sometimes, in a small subset of people, there's a neurochemistry imbalance that needs to be fixed. But in a book by Thomas Szasz called The Myth of Mental Illness, he lays out the blueprint that I want to expand on further. Most people don't have depression. They have problems in living. Most people don't have a neurochemistry imbalance. Instead, they live their lives in a way that makes them feel depressed or anxious. And in exploring the evolutionary basis of mental illness, where it comes from, the hypothesized reason it exists, and what it tells us, I found a way to implement these ideas into my own life and cure me of my anxiety when I was at my lowest point during the pandemic. So with that said, I wanted to make this video in the hopes that understanding the evolutionary basis for depression and how it's related to our social connections can help you overcome it, just like it helped me. Let me start by asking a question. What is the difference between low self-esteem, low confidence, and the development of mental illnesses? Do they all have different pathologies, or do they stem from the same biological pressures? The answer is not as obvious as you may think. Self-esteem is defined as the overall opinion you hold of yourself, characterized by how you feel about your abilities, your limitations, and whether or not you are deserving of respect. But most importantly, it is a function of how a person stands relative to those around them. If this is indeed the case, it implies that feelings of low confidence, low self-esteem, depression, and anxiety all have their roots in a sense of defeat and entrapment. These feelings arrive from perceiving oneself as having a lower status compared to others within a social hierarchy. This concept aligns with social rank theory, which suggests that our emotions and moods are influenced by how we perceive our social standing. More specifically, it's about the extent to which we feel inferior or believe that others look down upon us. Interestingly, anxiety and depression are natural experiences shared across mammalian species. When individuals experience these negative mental states, they often exhibit submissive behavior. This behavior signals to other more dominant individuals that those in subordinate roles are no longer a threat to their own status within the social hierarchy, ultimately contributing to the establishment of social cohesion. So could this mean that shame, anxiety, and depression are submissive strategies put in place by lower-ranking individuals who find themselves in an unwanted position? Maybe, but it does not seem to be the full answer. More importantly, what we want to understand today is if hierarchical rank affects confidence level. And if it does, what can we do about it if you find yourself in that position? So today we're going to explore the biology behind hierarchical rank and how it affects confidence, insecurity, and the pathological development of mental illnesses. 300 million years ago, animals engaged in fierce competition for individual access to vital resources like food and territory. As time passed, some species underwent an evolutionary shift, leading them to adopt a group living strategy. This shift brought forth several evolutionary advantages, including enhanced protection against predators and improved access to essential resources, among other benefits. But as Gilbert et al. Found, with the adoption of group living emerged two psychological systems which function to preserve social order: a social rank system and a safety system. Slowly, competition between individuals shifted from struggles for territory to social rank, as higher-ranking individuals had better access to resources and mates than their counterparts did. But the acknowledgement of differences in rank was not only advantageous to dominant individuals, but to the group as a whole as well. Sure, ranking is determined to curb aggressive behavior, but it also gives ample time to those in lower-ranking positions to allow them to build themselves up, to increase their resources, strength, and capabilities so they can better challenge the people that are at the top of the social hierarchy. Above all else, the social cohesion of ranking served to function as a channel through which social control and resources could be distributed to all, increasing the fitness of the species and everyone in the group as a whole. Thus, as Brass in 2002 pointed out, the purpose of the social rank system is to remain aware of your rank, so you can at a later date be better able to compete for higher positions, and consequently expand resource acquisition or mating opportunities. Alternatively, soon after, the safety system views of the world began to develop. This views the social realm not as a competitive space, but instead as a cooperative space, where others may extend reassurance and assistance. So instead, the safety system theory implies individuals search for opportunities to cooperate and connect with potential allies. This is done through a variety of manners, but is most effective through tribal biology, specifically in-group and out-group distinctions, which relies on evaluations of sameness and differences. One's position within a group frequently hinges on their capacity to adhere to the group's morals and standards. This aspect has been proven to be a reliable predictor of group acceptance, popularity, and rank. Some scholars even propose that the distinction between in-groups and out-groups might have evolved from kin selection because many hunter-gatherer groups were genetically related. Either way, Brass in 2002 found within humans, this sense of group belonging has evolved to become fundamental to physical and mental health. having important implications for self-esteem and self-identity. The reason is simple. Humans need the group to survive, and the only way to be a part of the group is to be accepted, and this is done through being similar. Through this, networks and alliances have become so important in humans. In fact, our internal evaluative algorithms for making both judgments of rank and belongingness are linked, and this is where the first evidence has emerged linking mental health to social ranking. But to proceed in understanding this link and how we can use it to cure our anxiety, depression, or low confidence, we must first take a look at a closely related species, chimpanzees. Chance in 1988 found that primates generally adhere to two main forms of group living, characterized by opposing interactional styles, agonic and hedonic. The agonic mode of interaction is typical in hierarchical societies where group members concentrate on defending against threats to status. Agonic behavior is focused on aggression and the inhibition of aggression, usually through submission. As described by Chancel, agonistic competition spans back 300 million years, and it is deeply ingrained into the genome. Extensive observational evidence of reptiles and birds reveal that when they compete for breeding territory, individuals confront one another and display various power signals, which may include standing tall, maintaining eye contact, or puffing themselves up. This type of behavior can also be found in humans, especially in the context of fighting. Agonic behavior functions as a means of evaluating the strength, fighting capability, and resource holding potential of one's opponent. If one determines that their adversary is more capable than they are, which makes them feel like they will lose the altercation, they may take to flight and escape unscathed. On the other hand, if one determines their own resource holding potential to be stronger than that of their opponent, they are free to initiate the altercation. Thus, Sloman in 2003 suggested an accurate internal evaluative algorithm is crucial not only for avoiding potentially fatal fights, but also for provoking winning situations, which may improve one's standing. The hedonic mode of interaction is characterized by cooperation and assurance, similar to the safety system described previously. Hedonic behavior is much more affectionate and is distinguished by assistance and reconciliation. However, this type of behavior only emerged in the last couple thousand years. So while both modes of interaction can be found in all societies, for today, what matters is the agonic mode of interaction, as it is much more deeply ingrained in the psyche of humans. So now that we've explained what the hedonic mode of interaction is, let's dive into the involuntary subordinate strategy deployed by low-ranking individuals in chimp societies. After assessing one's opponent, polygamous species usually react with either a fight or flight response. However, in a blocked escape scenario, where territory is limited or escape is impossible, this pattern diverges. Chance in 1988 noted, upon losing dominance, defeated individuals undergo a change in physical demeanor, known as the involuntary subordinate strategy. It is characterized by a change in mechanisms inherent to status, things like a reduction in dopamine and testosterone. For example, an early study by McLeon in 1985 of farmyard fowls found that despite an absence of physical injury, defeated birds seemed to be paralyzed. Furthermore, with their wings and head lowered to the ground, the birds seemed to experience a depressive mood. Similarly, John et al. Demonstrated that defeated lizards lost their characteristic bright colors and then eventually died right after. Given the dependency on individuals in the same group, social animals are perpetually faced with blocked escape scenarios, as a flight response to in-group confrontation would result in both diminished breeding chances as well as a significantly increased threat of predation. So because of this, the involuntary subordinate strategy is adaptive in that it indicates to the dominant individual that their opponent has truly yielded, so no altercation has to continue, allowing the subordinate individuals to maintain social bonds with the whole group. This is beneficial for both parties. The dominant does not need to waste energy continually beating on the lower-ranking individuals, and the lower-ranking individuals can invest energy into themselves so they are better able to challenge the other one at a later date. So we've established that individuals in subordinate roles should either prevent provocation from a dominant conspecific or quickly stop an attack if any is provoked, which is accomplished through submissive involuntary body language. This entails things like screaming, sideways glances, the fear grin, lowering the eyes, or crouching to appear smaller. But another more interesting avenue through which subordinates communicate their submission is through something called internal inhibition. This involuntary inhibitory process is characterized by the suppression of exploratory behavior and an inability to take initiative, both of which may be the consequences of attempts to avoid the aggressive attention of dominant people around them. Internal inhibition stimulates high states of arousal and fear, thus increasing levels of tension or anxiety in subordinates. But internal inhibition can also lead to the loss of energy, depressed mood, body aches, reduced information processing capacity, sleep disturbances, poor appetite, and loss of confidence. all of which are characteristics of depression. In submitting to the more dominant individual in a chimp society and constraining their own reproductive success, subordinates regulate levels of aggression within the group. It is in this context that we can see the first signs of an adaptive behavior that can lead to a pathological outcome if left unregulated. Low ranking in the hierarchical structure leading to mental health problems. Within any collective hierarchy, well-integrated individuals evoke and secure higher levels of positive social attention. Not only does positive attention lower defensive arousal, but positive attention from higher-ranking individuals heightens positive mood and state as well. Social attention also functions as a means through which individuals can get investment from others. Individuals of the same species may be coaxed into investing more in socially attractive individuals who can then access more resources, form more alliances, and secure more mates. The measure of one's ability to secure attention and elicit investment is known as social attention holding potential. With elevated social status and access to more resources, those with high social attention holding potential benefit from increased evolutionary fitness. On the other hand, individuals with low levels of SAHP tend to display the submissive behaviors associated with depression. Things like characteristics of involuntary subordinate strategy, such as inhibition, withdrawal, and lack of confidence. The most important modulator of mental well-being caused by rank positioning is its ability to be internalized. Internalizing your rank and orientating yourself in the world as a result. These internal estimates have implication for one's biological state. For instance, depressive brain state patterns may reflect either a primitive defeat-like state, which involves loss of feeling and social withdrawal, or a more submissive pattern with various efforts to get investment from others, or some combination of the two. One interesting reason to see depression as an adaptation comes from research into a receptor in the brain known as the 5-HT1A receptor. The 5-HT1A receptor is a subtype of the serotonin receptor, and it is the target of the most effective antidepressants. Its main mechanism of action is serotonin uptake, which we all know serotonin levels are lower in individuals with depression. Interestingly enough, to study the effects of this receptor, Sloman in 2003 ran an experiment on rodents to identify what would happen if this receptor was knocked out. The results found rodents lacking this receptor showed fewer depressive symptoms in response to stress, which suggests that it is somehow involved in promoting depression. But taken further, when the composition of the rat 5-HT1A receptor was compared to that of humans, it was found to be 99% similar, which suggests it had some functional advantage. This is because if it didn't, natural selection would have eliminated it from the gene pool. However, if it was a neutral trait, we would see a lot of variability in its composition, which also is not the case. So this implies the ability to turn on depression or anxiety is important and not an accident. But what could be useful about depression? Depressed individuals often think intensely about problems. These thoughts are called ruminations. They are persistent and highly analytical. They dwell on a complex problem, breaking it down into smaller problems, which are then considered one at a time. This analytical style of thought can be obviously very productive. It breaks down larger challenges into smaller components, each of which is not as difficult, so the problem becomes more fixable. When faced with a difficult problem, feeling depressed is often a useful response that may help you analyze and solve the issue at hand. For example, in a study by Andrews in 2009, it was found that people who get more depressed while working on a complex problem in an IQ test tend to score higher than the control groups. Analysis requires a lot of uninterrupted thought, and negative emotions, such as anxiety and depression, coordinate many changes in the body to help people analyze their problems without getting distracted. In a region of the brain known as the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, neurons must fire continuously for people to avoid being distracted. But this is very energetically demanding, just as the car's engine eats up fuel when going up a mountain road. And moreover, continuous firing can cause neurons to break down, just as the car's engine is more likely to break down when stressed. Studies of depression in rats show that the 5-HT1A receptor is involved in supplying neurons with the fuel they need to fire, as well as preventing them from breaking down. These important processes allow depressive rumination to continue uninterrupted with minimal damage done to the neuron cells, which may explain why the 5-HT1A receptor was evolutionarily conserved across all mammalian species. But there is one even stronger piece of evidence. People in depressed mood states are better at solving social dilemmas. This is precisely the problem that would seem to have been difficult enough to require deep analysis and important enough to drive the evolution of such a costly emotion. Let's take the example of a woman with a young child who discovers her husband is having an affair. Is the wife's best strategy to ignore it or force him to choose between her and the other woman, risking abandonment in the process. Laboratory experiments indicate that depressed people are better at solving social dilemmas by being better able to analyze the costs and benefits of the different options they could take. Depression is an evolutionary adaptation, letting you know that you've got a complex social problem that the mind is intent on solving. This is part of the reason why cognitive behavioral therapy actually works to help treat mental illnesses. They encourage depressive rumination rather than trying to stop it, and they focus on trying to help people solve the social problems that trigger their bouts of depression. When one considers all the evidence, depression seems less like a disorder where the brain is operating in a haphazard way, and instead seems more like an intricate, evolved adaptation, a highly organized mechanism that performs a specific function to improve outcomes for the individual. But what about self-esteem? How does social rank affect self-esteem? The sociometer hypothesis, coined by Mark Leary, states that self-esteem is used as a mechanism for monitoring social cues. Specifically, self-esteem is used to get acceptance in groups and as a response to standing in social relationships. One of the lines of support for this hypothesis was that monitoring social inclusion and exclusion was an adaptive problem. This means that evolutionary processes that sculpted the mind would likely have included a system to monitor social inclusion and motivate corrective action if the level of inclusion became too low. As Leary et al. Pointed out in 1995, self-esteem can be considered a system that monitors the environment, both internal and external states, for situations that over evolutionary history indicated significant reproductive or status costs, and as a result motivate necessary corrective actions. Social inclusion and exclusion includes one's status in mating relationships, in friendships, in coalitions, and kinships, all of which are arranged into hierarchies. Other examples can include in-group status relative to out-groups of various sorts. For example, interpersonal dominance, interpersonal status, and intersexual attractiveness. So, with all that laid out, self-esteem enhancement programs, which are popular in schools, carry the assumption that self-esteem is primarily based upon subjective belief states. Specifically, the idea behind such programs is that the improvements of self-esteem can be made without an objective look at how these people are orientated in the hierarchy of the people around them. In particular, the problem is these programs enjoy a property known as non-zero sumness. Increases in a trait in one person does not have any implications for decreases in the same trait in another person. Instead, these traits can and are often assessed by comparing how an individual currently views him or herself and that person's ideal self. The sociometer hypothesis proposes that self-esteem acts as a monitoring and motivational system involved in the maintenance of interpersonal relationships, meaning perceived status acts as a monitor and is directly related to self-esteem. Lowered self-esteem and anxiety are hence products of perceived exclusion. The sociometer hypothesis can efficiently explain situational constraints on self-esteem, as reinforced by the high correlation between self-esteem and an individual's performance in domains that are judged important to others. In one study, positive feelings about oneself were generated by inclusion in a working group, but negative feelings about oneself were generated by exclusion. Thus, the sociometer model of self-esteem is fairly directly keyed to the objective world states, rather than to purely subjective belief states. The fact that the sociometer model and similar models of self-esteem think that self-esteem is based on objective world states is not problematic per se. The problem, however, is that most aspects of the world involve zero-sum, situations in which an increase in the standing of one person involves a decrease in standing for others. If aspects of self-esteem are zero-sum in nature, then those elements of self-esteem cannot be enhanced in a population en masse. The processes of social inclusion and exclusion central to the sociometer hypothesis have zero-sum aspects to them. And in studies by Leary et al. In 1995 and 1998, they were clearly zero-sum, meaning for every winner, there must at least be one loser. The bottom line is this: self-esteem or confidence in oneself is enhanced by raising value. Today, people are more worried and compare themselves more than ever before. And as a result, low confidence and mental health struggles are running rampant. But these mental health struggles may not necessarily be a terrible thing. They're just a representation of our value, a representation of where we stand relative to others whom, as a social species, we have a strong tendency to compare ourselves to. So the next time you're anxious, ask yourself why. Why am I scared? Is it because I lost my job? Am I worried about the future? Self-esteem is the result of your brain rationalizing your reality and taking all that data into account. These include experiences, both positive and negative, to produce an outcome in the form of an emotion based on what your brain predicts the outcome to be. The reality is, if you're always anxious and depressed, it's probably because of some type of social problem. some type of problem in living. It's your brain realizing you are not where you want to be or not where you need to be. So maybe, and this might sound controversial, these negative states are useful adaptations if you use them correctly. What got me out of my anxiety was sitting down and doing introspective work, thinking about why I felt the way I felt. Why was I feeling so stressed and anxious all the time? And once I finally started to break down my problems, I realized it was because of my rank at the time. I just graduated from university, didn't have many friends, didn't have a good job, and was overwhelmed by the state of the world. So I slowly worked to bring order back into my life, get a better job, do things that scared me, until I found new friends and so on. When I went to a psychotherapist for my anxiety, the first thing they did was give me medication. But in hindsight, I didn't need it. I just had to internalize and solve my social problems. So when it comes to you, sit and ruminate on what complex social problems you have, why you feel the way you do, and your brain will produce a solution, a healthy solution. If you ask the question, your brain will eventually offer the solution. Now, I want to clarify, if your doctor gives you medication for your mental illness, take it. I'm definitely not saying not to. What I was trying to do with this video is offer another solution, another tool in your toolkit, one that may work for you just as it worked for me.